All right, here we go. We got chapter 6, the London opening, and we have a London expert and recovering London addict, Jesse here. How are you doing, Jesse?
I'm doing great. Yeah, so one of my favorite posts I ever wrote for chess goals was why I dropped the London system. And so I'm going to get some PTSD, I think, from looking at London theory, but I'm ready to do it. So we all know how the London starts. So either knight f3 or bishop f4, these moves are interchangeable. So we're going to do the same thing. The one wrinkle that I want to that we should go over is against the London, we're recommending e6 first instead of c6 that we're seeing in a lot, and that's going to be a key idea in a lot of these lines. So e6, now we get a standard London system, and bishop d6. So already offering a bishop trade. Um, there's a lot to unpack here. So we have 5 different moves we're going to look at here in this position, which is just kind of crazy. And let's start with bishop g3. I think this is about what we'll see about half the time. Very thematic London move, wanting to capture towards the center. So let's go over how we're going to put our little chess goals wrinkle against bishop g3.
So our idea here is queen to e7, and this is a line that I found based on the Lichess database. It was scoring pretty well, and I was playing around with a bunch of different ideas, like what could we do against a London player that's just not in their standard London repertoire. I wanted to find something a little bit different, and queen e7 has this nice, I call it a trap in the course, but it just depends. Like it's not always, a winning move or something. But we're gonna look for bishop takes g3, and after white takes back, queen to b4, checking the king and hitting the b pawn. So it's just kind of this cool little idea that makes white think a bit, and hopefully takes them out of the standard London moves. But now that I mentioned that, let's try to start with what looks to be kind of the standard London move, pawn to e3. So after e3, we're going to take back, queen to b4 check. Now at this point, there's 2 natural moves, knight b to d2 and knight to c3. We'll look at both of those, but knight b to d2 is by far the most common. So what are we going to do after this?
And yeah, so after knight b2, we are going to, of course, take our pawn. Kind of the whole idea behind this operation. And like Matt said, it's not like we're winning here or anything, but this is not what you want to see as a London player. London players are boring, middle-aged accountants, and they just want to get a position, play normal chess. They don't want to sack a pawn, try to get the rook involved. Okay, sorry, I'll stop. But London players do just want a nice normal setup. When they see this prep, I think we're already winning the psychological battle. So let's take our free pawn. Bishop d3, nice developing move, getting ready to castle. And we need to get our queen to safety quickly. So queen a3, making a lot of room backwards. Is there anything else you wanted to say about these last few moves, Matt?
No, essentially, so what we want to do is grab the pawn and then get the queen back to safety. Um, and in these kind of positions, like we're not necessarily getting the initiative because when we take the pawn, white gets a lot of development in. But what we're doing is we're playing for the material advantage in terms of the imbalances. And if we can hold the material, that can allow us to play for the win. And if white tries to get the material back, that's when we look to play for the initiative. So we're going to look at 2 lines here. We're going to look at castling for white and rook takes h7, trying to win that pawn back immediately. So let's start with castling. We're going to recommend knight to f6, and after knight to e5, white is playing actively, but they do have to be careful about having too many trades on the board. So if we start trading everything off and we're just up a pawn in the endgame, we're going to have a big advantage, and we're going to be playing for the win. So knight e5 looks aggressive, right? White wants to play aggressive, they're down a pawn, but this is actually a small mistake because it's allowing us to start offering trades. Knight b to d7.
Yep, and we are happy with trades here because we have the extra pawn. So if we take everything off the board, we should be winning with the extra pawn. So after we offer the knight trade, white probably doesn't want to go back or defend and kind of get into the same situation. So they're going to play aggressive with the move f4, so looking to kind of clamp down on the e5 square. Here, we shouldn't really give them this advantage. If we take, they're going to take back with very likely the f-pawn. Their rook comes alive, our knight needs to move, so there's no reason to allow all this. We're instead going to undermine the center with c5. So if they take here, we could always take back, or we could take here and damage their pawn structure. So c5 is a really nice pawn break to get in very at this exact moment. So that's a really nice move to kind of destabilize the position even more.
Yeah, and I put in the notes here. White is the one that might be wanting a queen trade soon if they're not careful, because these dark squares are all vulnerable for white if we're able to chip away at their pawn structure. That's what we're doing with c5. Like, we have ideas of h5 even, bringing the rook into the attack. We're trading here and playing a move like queen c3, targeting this weak pawn. So we're very quickly coming at the dark pawns. So now the best move is actually queen c1. We're going to take, they take, king e7. And at this point, I'm claiming that white doesn't have really any compensation for the pawn. And I think our plan is going to be pawn to c4, knight to e8, and then f6, kicking this knight out. And then let's try to convert this pawn up endgame. So what I'm hoping is when you get the London and you're able to win that b2 pawn with this little trap, that you're able to get this type of position where you say, okay, I'm going to grab the pawn, get the queen back to safety, that I'm not going to play super passive, but I'm just going to look for trades, and if white gives me anything, I will take it, right? If they give me a chance to play active, chance to play for the initiative, I'm going for it. You know, we're not just going to sit back and hold that pawn forever. We're going to look to play dynamically and use that pawn to our advantage.
Yep, and white's pawn structure looks very ugly here. Some overextended pawns, some backwards pawns, doubles pawns, and we have pretty much no weaknesses in our camp. So we have the extra pawn, and really playing for the win here. So yeah, nice transition into the end game.
Yeah, so now let's look at white trying to get this pawn back right away. Rook takes h7. And I put in the notes here, this move almost always gives white's compensation away. So what we can do now is trade down and go right into this endgame. Rook takes h7, bishop takes h7, knight f6, hitting this bishop with a tempo. And after the bishop comes back, now we're going to again play c5, kind of going after these dark squares, right? We see there's no dark square bishop for either side, but if we can chip away at that d pawn, bring the knight out, maybe attack it with the queen, that's going to give us a bit of play. And actually here I mentioned knight b to d7 might even be our recommended move. So if takes, we can take back with the knight. And yeah, white's already down a little bit according to the engine. And if white doesn't capture on c5, what are we going to do?
So if white doesn't capture on c5, we can just push on with c4 and really play connect 4, get all these pawns rolling, and yep, just keep pushing our queenside pawns.
Yeah, and a nice imbalance to note here is we have an extra queenside pawn and white's extra pawn is doubled. So yeah, if we get c4 in and then start pushing b and a, we could create a passer over here and play connect 4.